Every Wednesday evening, the shyest rancher in Blackwood sat in the last row of a small schoolhouse and tried to hide his trembling hands. They called him the Shadow. At 24, Caleb had already learned how to disappear in a room full of people. But the woman in the red dress saw him. What Caleb didn't know was that Elena had noticed things about him that nobody else ever did. The way he lowered his eyes when people spoke. The way he always sat in the back row. The way he disappeared before anyone could thank him. And when the bank came to take the only land he had left, what she did for him would leave the whole valley speechless. The wind across the Montana plains in the autumn of 1893 didn't just blow. It searched for weakness. His hands trembled whenever he felt eyes on him. He was 24 years old, a man built of iron and grief. His shoulders were broadened by the relentless task of hauling water from a drying well. His face still held the soft, uncarved lines of a boy who had spent too much time talking to horses and not enough to people. In the dying town of Blackwood, they called him the Shadow. He moved through the general store without making a sound. His head was always bowed, as if he were constantly apologizing for the oxygen he consumed. He had inherited this patch of rock and dust after his father succumbed to the fever 2 years prior. The land was a debt, a burden, a patch of Montana that the Northern Pacific Railroad claimed ownership of in every way that mattered. The debt grew like a weed in the rain. Caleb didn't mind the physical labor. He didn't mind the isolation that turned other men mad. But the silence of the big house at night was a weight no man could lift alone. It was a hollow, ringing silence that reminded him he was vanishing. Some nights, Caleb ate supper standing beside the stove because sitting alone at the table hurt too much. There was still only one plate on the shelf, one chair pulled close to the fire, one cup beside the wash basin. The house had not felt like a home since his father died. Each Wednesday, he sought a different kind of silence. He rode his chestnut mare, Bird, 5 miles into the valley. A small wooden schoolhouse stood there, a lonely sentinel against the bruising purple of the darkening sky. He didn't go for the children's lessons. He went for the adult literacy class that Elena taught by the flickering light of 3 kerosene lamps. Elena was a woman who seemed to have been carved from the very timber of the mountains. She was strong, unyielding, and possessed a quiet grace that made the rowdy townspeople lower their voices. She was 32, a widow who had lost her husband to the great blizzard of '88. She wore her grief not as a shroud, but as a suit of armor. In the gallery of Caleb's mind, she was always standing at the front of the room. Her dark hair was often braided with eagle feathers and silver beads, a nod to a heritage the town chose to ignore until they needed her wisdom. She wore a red dress, the color of a sunset burning against the drab brown of the schoolhouse walls. She was a daughter of the land who knew the old stories of the Blackfeet, as well as she knew her Bible. She treated every person who entered her classroom with a dignity they didn't find in the bank or the saloon. Caleb arrived early that Wednesday. The air bit at his ears, a warning of the winter that promised to be the hardest in a generation. He tied Bird to the rail and stepped inside. The heat from the potbelly stove hit him like a physical blow. He took his seat in the very back corner, the furthest point from the light. The desk was too small for his long legs. He felt like a bear trying to inhabit a bird's nest. He pulled out his slate and a piece of chalk. His movements were deliberate and slow. He had to hide the trembling of his hands. The room began to fill with the broken remains of the valley. Railroad workers with soot-stained skin. A shopkeeper's wife whose husband had lost his mind to the bottle. Young men who spent more time whispering jokes than looking at their primers. Among them was Thorne. Thorne owned half the valley and spent the other half of his time trying to steal the rest. He was a man who saw the panic of 1893 not as a tragedy, but as a harvest. Thorne didn't need to learn to read. He sat in the front row to remind everyone that he was the one paying the school taxes. He was the predator in a room full of prey. Thorne caught Caleb's eye and smirked. He leaned back, stretching his expensive leather boots into the aisle. "Still struggling with the alphabet, Shadow?" Thorne muttered. The words were loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "I hear there's a dog in the next county that can scratch its name in the dirt better than you can read." Caleb didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the grain of the wood on his desk. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He felt the heat rise in his neck, a deep, burning shame that made him want to dissolve into the floorboards. The room went silent as Elena walked in. The hem of her red dress whispered against the floor, a sound like a secret being told. She didn't say a word to Thorne. She didn't need to. The authority she carried in her stride was enough to make the man pull his feet back. She walked straight to Caleb's desk. Her presence smelled of cedar, old paper, and the cold mountain air. She reached down and placed a small leather-bound book on the corner of his desk. It wasn't a primer. It wasn't the Bible. "Progress isn't measured by how fast you run, Caleb," she said. Her voice was low and steady, a private resonance meant only for him. "It's measured by the fact that you keep walking when the wind is in your face." He looked up then. He met her dark, perceptive eyes for only a second. His shyness was a physical force, pulling his gaze back to the floor. But in that second, he saw something terrifying and beautiful. He saw a reflection of his own solitude. He recognized that they were both outsiders in a world that demanded noise and bravado. She moved to the front of the room. The lesson began. The chalk scratched rhythmically against the blackboard. She wasn't teaching poetry tonight. She was teaching them how to read the fine print of land contracts. In 1893, the literacy was the only weapon the poor had against the banks. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to drift past the window. They were illuminated by the golden light from within, like falling stars. Caleb tried to focus on the letters, but his mind kept drifting to the way Elena's hand had lingered near his own. He thought about his ranch. He thought about the empty kitchen, where the only sound was the clock ticking away his life. He had always believed he was invisible to her, just another ghost in a sea of struggling men. A man haunted by the fear that he was fundamentally inadequate. The hours passed. The lesson ended. The students began to filter out into the biting cold. Caleb lingered. He pretended to sharpen his pencil with a small pocket knife. He waited for the room to clear, his heart a heavy stone in his chest. He wanted to thank her for the book, but the words felt like jagged glass in his throat. When the last person had left, the silence in the schoolhouse became thick. Elena was cleaning the blackboard. Her back was to him. The red of her dress was vibrant against the white chalk dust. Caleb stood up. His boots creaked on the floor, sounding like gunshots in the quiet room. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he whispered. His voice cracked, betrayed by his own nerves. She turned slowly. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were soft. "You don't have to stay, Caleb," she said. "The storm is picking up. I wanted to say thank you," he managed. He gestured toward the book. "Most folks don't bother with someone like me." Elena walked toward him. She stopped just a few feet away. He could see the intricate beadwork on her leather belt. He could see the pulse in her neck. "They don't see you, Caleb, because they're too busy looking at their own reflections in the glass," she said. "But I see the way you look at the world." "You've been watching me?" he asked. His breath hitched. "Every day," she replied. A faint sadness touched her smile. "I watch you ride past the schoolhouse on your way to the creek. I watch the way you mend your fences, even when you think the world has forgotten you. I see a man who has more dignity in his silence than this whole town has in its shouting." Caleb felt a lump form in his throat. It was a mix of relief and a strange, terrifying hope. He had spent his whole life trying to hide. He believed his worth was tied to his ability to disappear. But here was a woman who had seen through the shadow. She had found the man beneath the fear. The next morning, the world was a desert of white. The panic of 1,893 had finally hit the valley with the force of a landslide. The local bank had posted a notice. All outstanding loans were to be settled by the end of the month, or the land would be seized. For Caleb, this was a death sentence. He had exactly 3 weeks to find $200. It was an impossible sum for a man whose cattle were thin and whose pockets were empty. He spent the days working until his hands bled. He gathered timber to sell to the railroad, but the railroad wasn't buying. They were facing their own bankruptcies. The shame he felt wasn't just for himself anymore. It was the fear that he would lose the only place he belonged. He feared losing the chance to ever invite Elena to see his world. He avoided the town, but he couldn't avoid the schoolhouse. The Wednesday classes were the only thing keeping his soul from drifting away. In the classroom, the tension was a physical weight. Men who used to joke were now silent. Their eyes were hard and desperate. the eyes of men who were considering things they never thought they'd do. Thorn was there too. He wasn't mocking anymore. He was circling like a vulture. He was waiting to buy the foreclosed land for pennies on the dollar. He approached Caleb during the break. "I'll give you $50 for the water rights, Shadow," Thorn said. His voice was like oil on water. "It's more than the bank will give you." "The bank will give me nothing," Caleb said, his voice trembling. "Exactly." Thorn smiled. "Take the 50. Leave the valley. A man like you isn't meant for this kind of stress." It was a moral crossroads. Caleb could take the money, run away, and live a quiet, cowardly life. Or he could stay and lose everything. Elena seemed to sense the darkness closing in on the room. She changed the lessons. She focused less on grammar and more on the history of resilience. She spoke of the great buffalo herds. She spoke of the people who lived without fences, surviving winters that would kill a modern man. Her voice was a soothing balm to the jagged nerves of the room. Caleb watched her. For the first time, he didn't feel shy. He felt a protective fire lighting in his chest. He realized that Elena wasn't just a teacher. She was the heart of the community. She was the only thing holding the frayed edges of their dignity together. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Caleb found Elena standing outside. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. The stars hung like ice crystals in the black sky. "He's coming for your land, isn't he?" she asked. She didn't turn around. She always knew he was there. "Thorn wants the water," Caleb said. His voice was steadier than it had been in years. "He thinks I'm too weak to fight him." Elena turned to him. The feathers in her hair danced in the biting wind. "Dignity isn't about winning, Caleb," she said. "It's about not letting them take who you are." She reached into the folds of her red dress. She pulled out a small, heavy pouch. "My husband left me some gold eagles," she said. "He was saving them for a house we never built." She held the pouch out to him. Caleb recoiled as if she had offered him a strike from a rattlesnake. "I can't take your money, Elena," he said. His pride was a sharp, painful thing. "I'm a man who works for what he has. I'm not giving it to you," she said firmly. She stepped closer until their breaths mingled in the frozen air. "I'm investing in a neighbor. I'm investing in the man who treats his horses with more kindness than most men treat their wives. Take it, Caleb. Pay off the bank. When the spring comes, you can pay me back with interest." He looked at the pouch. He looked at her face, illuminated by the pale, cold moonlight. He saw the strength in her jaw. He saw the unwavering belief in her eyes. He realized that to refuse her would be to refuse the very belonging he had been searching for. He reached out. His hand was finally still. He took the pouch. As his fingers touched hers, a current passed between them. It was a silent vow. They were no longer alone in the cold. The next day, Caleb walked into the bank in town. He didn't bow his head. He didn't look at the floorboards. He walked straight to the counter. He tossed the pouch of gold eagles onto the wood. The sound of the gold was the loudest thing in the room. "I want my deed," Caleb said. Thorn let out a short laugh. "That money isn't yours." Caleb turned slowly. For the first time anyone in Blackwood could remember, the shadow looked a man straight in the eye. "No," Caleb said. "It belongs to someone who believes I'm worth more than $50. The banker, a man who had looked through Caleb for years, blinked in surprise. His eyes widened as he counted the heavy coins. Thorn was standing by the window. His face turned a dark, bruised shade of purple. He realized his prey had escaped. Caleb didn't say a word to him. He took his deed. He folded it neatly. He walked out into the bright, biting sun. He rode straight to the schoolhouse. The children were just leaving. Their laughter rang out in the crisp air like bells. Elena was standing in the doorway. When she saw Caleb riding up, her expression didn't change, but he saw the way her shoulders relaxed. He dismounted and walked up the steps. He stood on the top landing beside her. They stood in silence for a long time. They watched the shadows of the clouds move across the valley floor. "I paid them," he said. "I know," she replied. "I watched you ride into town." Caleb looked at her. He really looked at her. He saw the lines of wisdom around her eyes. He saw the strength in her hands. "Why did you help me?" he asked. "Why me? Out of all the people in this valley?" Elena turned to him. The red of her dress caught the afternoon light. "Because you were the only one who looked at me," and saw a woman, Caleb, she said softly. Not a teacher, not a widow, not an Indian woman, just me. And because I knew that if you lost your land, the heart of this valley would go a little colder. Caleb reached out. For the first time in his life, he didn't hesitate. He took her hand in his. His calloused thumb traced the back of her palm. She didn't pull away. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was a simple gesture of trust. It meant more than any words ever could. The winter of 1893 remained harsh. The panic continued to claim the futures of many. But on the small ranch at the edge of the mountains, the smoke from the chimney never stopped rising. Caleb and Elena spent their evenings by the fire. They read the books she had saved. They planned for a spring that felt closer every day. He learned to read. He didn't just learn the words on a page. He learned the language of the land. He learned the quiet signals of a woman's heart. She taught him that belonging wasn't something you were born with. It was something you built, stone by stone, word by word. The townspeople still called him the Shadow, but now they said it with a note of respect. They saw the way he carried himself. They saw the way he looked at Elena. They saw the way she looked at him. They realized that some fires can't be put out by a mountain winter. The shy rancher had thought he was invisible. He thought he was destined to live and die in a silence of his own making. But he had been watched. He had been seen. In the eyes of the woman in the red dress, he had found his dignity. He had found his home. The 1890s were a time of transformation for the West. The frontier was closing. The old ways were dying. But in that small valley, something ancient and true survived. Dignity is the only thing a man cannot borrow. Courage is the only thing a man cannot fake. Caleb learned that true strength isn't found in the absence of fear. It is found in the presence of someone worth fighting for. As the years passed, the schoolhouse remained. It was a testament to the power of knowledge. It was a monument to the resilience of the human spirit. Caleb and Elena's story became a legend in the valley, a story of a year when the world fell apart, a story of two souls who found a way to hold each other together. They proved that even in the darkest of times, there is a light. It is a light that cannot be extinguished. You only need the courage to look for it. Every Wednesday, even after they had grown gray and slow, they would return to the schoolhouse. He would sit in the back. She would stand at the front. And they would remember. They would remember the day the shadow stepped into the light. They would remember the weight of the gold and the warmth of the hand. History forgets the names of the bankers. History forgets the names of the men like Thorne. But the land remembers the men who tended it with kindness. The land remembers the women who taught the world how to read the truth. Caleb's trembling hands eventually grew steady, not because the world became easier, but because he no longer had anything to hide. He was a man who had been seen. And that was enough. The Montana wind still blows across those plains. It still carries the scent of coming snow, but now it also carries the echo of a story of a red dress and a leather-bound book, a story of how a shadow became a man and how a man became a legend. If you were moved by this story of finding strength and love, remember this.
Your worth is not defined by the numbers in a bank ledger. Your dignity is not something that can be seized by a contract. It is found in the quiet moments of resilience. It is found in the eyes of those who truly see you. Don't forget to look for the light. Don't forget to be the light for someone else. Thank you for walking this path with us. The frontier may be gone, but the heart remains. Keep walking, even when the wind is in your face. The spring is coming. It always is. The silence is no longer a weight. It is a song, and it is beautiful.